everyone. Welcome to this month's Spooky Middle Grade Book Club Live. This month we are featuring, can I have the book, please? Okay. We are featuring Long Lost by Jacqueline West. And we are joined by New York Times bestselling author Jacqueline West to discuss her new book. Next month, we will be doing Hide and Seeker by Daka Herman. But this month, we're going to jump into and go behind the scenes, all things Long Lost. So with me, we have Lorian Lawrence,
Hi.
Ash Van Otterloo.
Hello.
And Jacqueline.
Hi.
Hi. So before we get started, I just wanted to mention that my daughter and I listened to Long Lost as an audiobook. It's a fantastic audiobook performance. And so I have a special guest here who wanted to be the one to ask the first question, if that was possible. Come on. All right. What's your question?
Which kind of stories come up first, Evelyn and Margaret or Fiona's?
It started with Fiona's story. I knew that was going to be the framework of the whole thing. But yeah, they followed each other very quickly. I mean, it wasn't one for a long time and then the other pair of sisters came. It was kind of boom, boom. Oh, it's going to be about two pairs of sisters, two layers of story. So yeah, it started with Fiona, but it grew very quickly to that second set. Thank you so much for reading the book.
I should mention also that while we're live, any questions, if anyone wants to ask anything in the chat, those questions will go to Jacqueline, and then we will make sure those get answered.
Josh, do you mind if I ask a follow-up question to your daughter's wonderful question?
Please go for it, yes.
Because I was also had that on my mind as I was reading it, and I read this in one sitting. I loved it so much. It felt like everything good in the spooky world, and it was like exactly the kind of book that I would have died for as a kid. But I was just wondering, from like a writer point of view, a craft point of view, how did you balance the two different storylines? I mean, kind of three, but really two. Like, how did you balance that, writing them, and, what was your process like with that?
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad it worked, because actually balancing the two was the thing I was most afraid I would fail at. Like, from the beginning, I just thought, is it going to annoy readers every time I pull them into this other world? I know that as a reader, that often bothers me. I don't love the long flashbacks. I don't want to have to get to know a whole separate set of characters. So I was really afraid that I wouldn't do that compellingly enough. So I do have a critique group of awesome and very honest writers who meet every week. And that was one of the main things I asked was, is the balance working? Is it feeling irritating to you when suddenly you're 100 years in the past yet again? And so, yeah, I just thought very carefully about it. And also, I'm a really chronological writer. I write the first chapter and then the second chapter and then the third. So everything was written in the order that it is in the book. So I wasn't thinking separately about, here's the 100 years ago story, here's the present day story. Instead, it was each one. And it's kind of like two musical themes in a way. Like, here's this set of sounds and moods, and here's this other set. And I was hoping that they would feel like they harmonized, like they braided together in the right way by the end. And so if people are liking it, then it worked. And I'm so grateful because, like I said, yeah, that was the thing I was not sure I could pull off.
Well, we can all agree you did. You pulled it off beautifully.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably one of my all-time favorite middle grade novels. I mean, it was just. I know it's your 11th book, and I've read many of your others, and they're all fantastic. But this feels like this was like a masterpiece. I love this book so much.
Oh, so, thank you so much. Yeah.
One of the things that really that I loved about this was a lot of the sneaking around at night, riding the bike late at night and kind of going behind the parents' back and doing all that stuff do you think that sort of stuff is sort of critical to middle grade fiction? The kids going off and doing their stuff, not necessarily behind the parents' back, but where the parents are totally secondary to the storyline.
I think in general it is kind of necessary, like a super protective, super involved set of parents is sometimes good in real life, but it would prevent so much action from happening in a middle grade book. And I suppose that's why we have so many, dead parents in middle grade books. And in this case, I wanted living parents, and they're there and they love the kids and they're involved, but they're also, they fail. They, like parents do. And I wanted to show how parents could try and still really hurt one kid, even if it's unintentional, and give this kid more and more reason to sort of rebel and try to solve things on her own, and maybe even like as revenge against all of them. Well, if you're going to leave me at home, fine. I'm not going to stay at home. I'm going to go do this thing. Because I think that's, that's pretty honest to an 11 or 12-year-old mindset. I know it was mine. So yeah, I think that breaking out that rebellion is just kind of necessary for middle grade protagonists.
I felt like you really got into the mind of Fiona, to the point, like, her anger became my anger. And I was becoming outraged on her behalf during some of these scenes. At one point I was like, darn it, Arden, like, stop being the center of attention. So I guess I'm wondering, are you a youngest child? And if not, how do you think that you were able to tap into that sort of the frustration and the powerlessness and the anger that she felt, and portray it in such a way that, I think everyone who reads this is able to sort of identify with what she's feeling?
Oh, I hope so. Hilariously, I am not the youngest child, and I don't have any sisters. I'm the oldest kid, and I'm the only girl. So yeah, I am the bossy big sister. Sorry to my younger brothers. So yeah, this was not a dynamic that I grew up with. It's not one I've ever experienced. Instead, it's the imaginary life I get to have. Growing up, I wanted a sister, and I read so many books that were about sisterhood. I mean, Little Women was on constant rotation in my imagination. And so this was, in a way, getting to explore what I think that might feel like. And I certainly use other families that I know well, other kids that I know, like just bits and pieces that's not based on anyone. But yeah, this is just my chance to explore what that might be like to be a different sibling in the configuration. Because I think sibling order is a huge thing in our lives, whether you're the oldest or the baby of the family, where you're placed in that family group has such an impact on who you are as a person. And so, yeah, this is one I wanted to explore.
I love how flawed everybody was. Like, as I'm a parent, and I was thinking at certain points, like the part with the birthday party when poor Fiona like can't go, and you feel so badly for her. You're like, you should be mad. You should be like, so upset. And then you're like, but what can the parents do? Like, I feel like there was so much realism in that and so much emotion where I was like, oh, what if this happened to me one day? What would I do as a parent? And I didn't have the answer. And I think that's why it worked so well, is because you just kind of let all the characters be flawed and make bad decisions and hurt each other, even though they still love each other. And I think you did that beautifully.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, I wrote my first, 6 books for young readers before I was a parent. And now I'm writing as a parent. And so certainly in that scene, now I'm way more attuned to the parents instead of just to the kids. And so, yeah, trying to be sympathetic to them too, and trying to create a situation where there's no perfect answer. They're looking for solutions with her. They're both trying to brainstorm, like, what could we do to make everybody happy? And sometimes you just can't make everybody happy. And in a family group, like, sometimes there's a power imbalance. Somebody's stuff gets prioritized over someone else's. And yeah, that's what happens here.
Yeah, and I loved how you were able to make Arden a sympathetic character, even while, it was easy to become sort of angry with her, as reading it from, sort of aligned with Fiona's perspective. But even during all that, you were able to sort of layer in these little moments where you could tell Arden was feeling guilt, or that Arden had something she wanted to say, and Fiona wasn't ready to hear it yet. But it almost, in a lot of ways, sort of added another layer of mystery, like what's going on with Arden, in a story that already had so many layers of mysteries. And one of the things that was most impressive to me was how many sort of like big reveal aha moments there were, where everything that you thought you knew sort of turned on its head, but in a way that felt totally organic. And I'm curious how much of the story, I guess it's the classic, are you a plotter or a pantser, or how much of this going in did you feel like this is where this story is going, and how much did you feel you discovered along the way?
Total pantser, total sloppy, like no system. Like I have to write the story to find out what the story's going to be. And if I try to outline, like I describe it to writer friends, I sound like a kid describing a plot of a movie. Like and then this happens, and then this guy comes in and says this. It doesn't, I don't know if it's because then I already know what's going to happen, so I'm not trying to discover it, or if it's just trying to force the action into something I've pre-planned. But yeah, I cannot outline to save my life. So I am a write it and find out what happens. And so as I get to know the characters, yeah, they expose more and more secrets, more and more layers. And that's one of my favorite things about the process. And then I'm getting to know, I mean, like, I didn't know how much I would love Arden by the end either. And the scene where Fiona's about to sneak out of the house late at night and they have this big talk. That was one of my favorite things to write, because it's when I finally got to, get under the sort of invulnerable, perfect kid layer of Arden and see what's like hurting her all along. And here she has one sibling who does not support her, who is leaving her more and more alone. And so, yeah, getting to dig into that was really fun. And yeah, I don't know if it would have happened if I were an outliner, just because that's just not my writing language. But yeah, I had to get there through lots of trial and error instead. That's how I do things.
I'm curious, was there anything that changed significantly that you discovered in your writing that wasn't necessarily in your plan, from first draft to final draft?
Oh my gosh. Not a lot. At first, the way things happened with the book that disappears, there were some differences with the librarian, Miss Miranda, how involved she was and how much she knew and where the book went. And I realized that I had written myself into a dead end, which happens a lot. And then I go back and cut everything up. I waste a ton of time, but it's just the only way that works.
Same. Totally the same.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that was one of the big threads that kind of changed direction. But other than that, a lot of it just kind of unfolded the way that felt like it needed to unfold. In this case, I got lucky. I mean, there are books I've written where I had to cut half the thing out and go back to the middle and start all over. But yeah, with this one, it was just a few of the little branches that didn't quite feel right.
That's amazing to me, just given how many twists and turns there are, how it all just kind of stayed together, That's great.
Yeah, and multiple storylines. I've said it. I'm such an outliner. I just am so in admiration that you can keep all of that straight as you went. Like, that's amazing to me. And I just am vying. I'm putting in my my request for a spinoff with Miss Miranda. Is that her name? I loved her. I wanted more descriptions of I want to see more things in her hair. I loved her.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the amazing things. Just this is a relatively minor character, but just to give her that moment where she talks about why she puts the things in her hair and how she was an outsider to the town as well. I mean, I love that. So as we're on the topic of libraries and librarians, let's talk about the mysterious, cool old mansion that becomes a library that was really another character altogether. So where did this come from? Is there a library like this in your life that you're drawing from, or is this complete fantasy?
So I get to thank a librarian for that too. Unfortunately, there's no library that I've actually visited that is this in my life. But I was doing an event at a library in Wisconsin, 4 or 5 years ago now, and I was drafting this. And so I already had several pieces of the plot kind of spinning around in my mind. And this librarian I was chatting with told me that she had grown up in Portage, Wisconsin, where the local public library was a mansion that had been donated to the town by this, I think she's a Pulitzer Prize winning playwright, a woman who is now completely forgotten. Her work has just been overlooked. But at the time, she was this incredibly important person and got hugely successful. And then her gorgeous house was the public library. And you can still find pictures of it online. But in the 90s, they decided they wanted a more functional space. And so they built a normal library.
Boring.
Yeah. Amazing looking, and yeah, it's full of fireplaces and weird little nooks, and exactly what your dream library should be, at least my dream library. So yeah, that's kind of where the seed of that came from. But I mean, in terms of what it looks like, that was all just concocted. Yeah.
So getting a little back to the previous question, so you're writing a book about a book that is writing itself as we go along. And when you started to write the story, you said that you kind of make it up as you go along for the most part. Did you really have a sense of what that story was going to be and why it was writing itself, or is that something that you discovered as you were writing?
Oh man, some of this, it's funny, by the time a book comes out, you're deep in another fictional world in your brain and you're already forgetting what it felt like to write every bit of what came before. So I think I knew most of it. And a lot of it, the fun part of it was it felt like that book was unfolding itself to me, just like it was to Fiona, because of the lack of outline thing. So I knew, it was going to start with this disappearance, and I knew there were going to be, local lore stories about the searcher who may or may not be to blame and may or may not be real. And then, how it was all going to unfold, I had the germ of an idea. But it was just through writing it that I figured out what was actually going to work, what was going to be true, what was not.
So I do. I noticed from the books of Elsewhere, we have paintings that are portals, but also can kind of come to life. Sort of ghosts of younger people, sort of getting involved in the present day, and that's a theme that I think reemerges in this book a little bit. You have a book that sort of brings these ghosts to life in some way. So it's interesting to me that you've written a couple of ghost stories or ghost adjacent stories, but you've taken a unique approach to ghosts in your stories. And I guess my question is, is there something about these objects, paintings, works of fiction, or whatever, that suggest themselves to you as the basis for these ghost stories?
Oh, yeah. As you were asking this, I'm like, you're totally right. I do that all the time. I think the fact that books and that artwork are a thing that is alive yet not, and are the thing that can live on when the creator is gone, or with or without that creator's presence, it sort of does take on a life of its own. And as a kid, I loved to imagine that, the paintings that hung in my grandparents' house would come to life as soon as we left the room. The people in them were just holding still while we watched. And I certainly felt the same way about books, that the characters in them were real, that they were alive, that somewhere in the world, that character who I loved must be walking down a street somewhere, sitting down and having a cup of tea inside a tree. Oh my gosh, cat.
Yep, cat. Sorry.
I love it. So I think, the fact that those artworks do feel like they are alive and have all these potential magical, lives within them, that's a thing that's always drawn me. It's probably why I write books. Yeah.
I was kind of wondering, it seems like in a lot of your books, especially this last one, there's such a close connection between people who are in brand new situations. Like, I've just moved somewhere new. I don't know anyone here. Everything's mysterious. And also things that are like, they should be gone, but they keep echoing from the past. Do you find yourself writing a lot of that? And what do you think that connection comes from? Why do they go together like peanut butter and jelly?
Again, you're totally right. So much of this is like therapy, you guys. You're like, oh, you're right. I do that in my brain all the time. I was never the new kid. Like, I lived in the same little town my entire childhood and finally left when I got to move away to college. And so I think even though I was never the new kid, I was often the lonely kid. I was often the odd kid. And so exploring these kind of lives that I never got to explore, but doing it through fiction, and then that feeling of being sort of out of place and alone and figuring out how you fit in this new community or new setting, that's something that has just always appealed to me, or always been part of, my daydream world. So yeah, very often it's a character exploring a new place, especially in my middle grade. I tend to like that entree into the world is the character embarking on this journey of discovery. And what was the other part? The jelly and the peanut butter.
I think that somehow, it seems like anyone who's going through a really new situation, it seems like those characters and themes are like so drawn toward like ghosts and old things and buildings that used to be something else, like recycled things.
Yes.
I love that in your book so much, especially this past one. My daughter and I are on chapter 19 of the audiobook, and oh my goodness, she's kind of mad that I'm talking here right now because we're going to listen to it right after.
Yay! Oh, I love that. Thank you. Yeah, I think too, I mean, as a kid and now, I have an obsession with places and with houses specifically. Like that any house is like a container for stories, that so many lives might have happened there, so many things that if you could just peek in the windows, you might get to figure out, what had happened in that place in the past. And so, yeah, the idea of being a person in this new situation, in a new location, and all the layers of history that are around you, that is continually inspiring to me. That is, I think, why settings inspire me, is the layers of possible stories hidden in any of those places. And of course, those stories might involve dead people. So yes, there they go.
So we have a question from the audience. Are there any characters that did not make it into the final version of the book?
Oh, so this is something that changed, and it changed so early that I had almost forgotten it. But yes, originally, the boy who she meets, the towny kid, the one who knows everybody and everything, he was an old man. So yes, at first, Fiona, met and chatted with this strange old guy at the library. And then eventually I realized that no, he needed to be someone closer to a peer, someone who would, draw her into the real world and real life, current day, and be sort of her bridge between all of this past and the present. And then he became a bigger character too.
And the future as well. I mean, I really like how you, not to give away the ending, but you kind of set up like this is a friendship that is going to continue on beyond the pages of this. And there's a great line, when he says something to the effect of, a lot of people don't understand why I would like to spend half my summer in a library. And she says, why wouldn't you? And I thought, I was like, these are my people. This is.
Yes, they're mine too.
So you write pretty convincingly of small town New England. And I say this as a small town New Englander. But I'm curious, so do you start with setting or plot or character, and how did you settle on the setting for Long Lost?
I almost always begin with setting. It's so important to me, and like many people have noticed, buildings in my books tend to take on life of their own and become a character. So in the books of Elsewhere, that house is a character, and in Long Lost, the library is a character. And yeah, in this case, I knew I wanted a small New England town. I love New England, but haven't gotten to spend much time there. I live in a small town in the Midwest. But I've been to, New Hampshire and Massachusetts and so on, mostly on school and book visits. And just the age of, the age of stuff out there. Like, just speaking of layers of history, there's just so much potentially hidden. And so, I wanted it to be in a place that has just these centuries of history and this small town sort of insular feeling built up, which then, this outsider, this new person comes into and starts unearthing these secrets that are really part of the town and aren't necessarily supposed to be known by outsiders. But that's something I wanted to explore. And I knew that from the get-go, that this is where it was going to be, and that was what was going to be important to the story.
And talk about ice skating or figure skating as a central element. It was sort of unexpected and unusual, I think, element for this particular story. And I wonder, do you have a connection to ice skating, figure skating, or is it just something that made sense for Arden as the story developed?
I knew from the beginning that she was going to be a competitive figure skater. That's just one of the pieces that was there from the beginning, because that is a kind of, endeavor that requires everything from a whole family. I mean, if a kid is going to be serious about that, like with certain other sports, and with that, I mean, it's even more specialized. You're more likely to find a good football team or basketball team in a small town. With skating, you might have to move. Your whole life is going to revolve around this thing. And I grew up in the Midwest. There was this open skating rink right down the block from my house. And I was a kid during, I feel like, the first like explosively popular era of Olympic figure skating goodness, you know, like, oh, Michelle Kwan and the Tanya Harding, Nancy Kerrigan drama, and all these things were like part of my small childhood. So figure skating to me was like glamorous and exciting and possibly deadly. And, I had posters of some of the Olympians hidden in my closet, Felipe Candeloro and Elvis Stoico and so on. So I think that's part of why I just thought, yeah, it's this athleticism, and it's also this sort of obsessive thing that people get involved in, and it would make sense that it would kind of take over a girl's life and then her family's life around her. Yeah.
And Fiona is so different and into such different things. And I love that her interests really aren't just completely different, but also serve the story in an interesting way, where she's able to apply some of those skills and her way of approaching things to uncovering the secrets of this town.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Yes, I wanted her to have passions of her own, that are strong, but that are very separate from her sisters, which I think often is what happens in families. My two younger brothers and I mean, like, if you could have three halves of a brain, we'd each have one. Like, we are each so different. It's just a completely separate little set of passions and skills. And so I think, yeah, that's definitely what happens in this case and because they're sort of, like, there's not quite enough territory for them both, that it makes even more sense for them to kind of separate from each other. Fiona's interests are going to be very different from Arden's interests. And that, yeah, then she can apply them to solving this mystery, because she is a kid who loves history and loves maps and loves, some things that might be unusual for younger kids, but that I think, are still passions for that kind of kid.
Yeah. One thing that's near and dear to me is sort of sympathetic villains. And I don't want to spoil the ending because it is a mystery, and sort of who the villain is a little bit of a mystery. But could you talk a little bit about how the story developed and why you chose to have a big bad guy that wasn't actually, that was more misunderstood or more, had more going on than just mwahaha,
Yeah, that's certainly more interesting to me too. I've done the kind of, the big bad evil that thinks it's justified and yet comes off as very evil. And I've done the kind of evil that thinks it's doing it for, benevolent purposes, like just thinks it knows better than everyone else. And in this, I wanted to do the kind of evil that just comes about in a very natural way, like sometimes through the most sort of close relationships. People hurt each other deeply without intending to. And then the layers of secrets that build up around, trying to protect that hurt or hide the blame for something. And I think, that's something that, if we haven't been through it, then maybe we're just lucky, because it's so easy to stumble into this kind of, injury to each other. And then, the guilt and the what do we hide? What do we not hide? How do we, like, the story we concoct around what has happened. And so that's, what I wanted to explore here, the story that gets created by time and by lies. Mm-hmm.
So having written a couple of different series and some standalones, what do you think are the biggest differences in your writing process, or just in constructing series versus standalones, and do you have a preference?
Well, right now I am loving writing standalones, because I wrote, the 5-book series, the Books of Elsewhere, I spent 13 years working on and writing in that world. I started it when I was in college, and then it just it was my whole adult life. And so by the time I was wrapping it up, everything in it felt so real to me that, I literally could walk down the street and see my characters and not be surprised. To me, they are real people. But I was also so ready to start something from scratch, like to get to move to a new place and meet new people. And so the scope of a standalone book, I'm finding so comfortable and so refreshing, because there's just, concocting a series, it just feels like you're building this bigger and bigger house of cards, and everything sort of feels more delicate. Like if I move this, is it going to screw up everything for the future? It's there's just so much balancing and so much weight on everything that the scope of this is really fun and pleasant for me right now. So maybe someday another giant series, but if that hadn't been the very first thing I ever published, I don't know if I would even have attempted it. It was kind of like beginner's luck plus hubris. Like, yeah, I can do a 5-book series. I don't know if I would say that now.
So no more series in the immediate future for you then?
Not in the immediate future. No plans.
What sorts of stories did you read as a child, or did you find that like helped kind of shape the aesthetic that you like to create when you're writing these spooky stories?
So a lot of the stuff that I feel like is the biggest influence on me now as a writer is not the stuff that I read passionately as a kid. Because as a kid, I read so much Victoriana, so much, British and classic children's literature. Like I said, Little Women on constant rotation, Anne of Green Gables, Alice in Wonderland, Narnia, The Hobbit, and so on. I genuinely thought you had to write in this sort of style to be a real writer. You had to write in this old-fashioned British, or Victorian way. And so actually getting to slip into that and long lost, getting to do this 100-year-old story is such a treat. Like, that's just my little like Easter egg for myself. Like, here's all your childhood influence. And so, in this book, I really do get to draw on some of my childhood favorites, but the things that I think are a bigger influence on my my adult writing style are not necessarily the things that I grew up with. Although some of that, stuff like Mary Downinghan was huge. The Bunnicula series, I know Lorian is a
Bunnicula.
I would not be a middle grade writer if it weren't for Bunnicula. Those books just like showed me what was possible. And things like Tolkien and Roald Dahl and Neil Gaiman and so on are all in there too in the soup, but they mostly came later.
There are so many parts in here that just reminded me of like those cozy gothic, books that I loved. I think it's totally appropriate for this age group to dip in and out of that. I think like you were, as I said before, super successful with that and kids will eat it up. But I'm just wondering now that you're saying what your influences were, if you would ever write like a gothic mystery for older kids or something, because I feel like I'm just giving you, this is turning into the Lori's telling Jacqueline what she wants her to write show. So just add that to the list. But I can totally see you doing that.
Oh my gosh. Yes, someone please tell me what to write. I have too many ideas and none of them feel right now. That's actually something I would love to explore. That is, as you can probably guess with my obsessions with setting and with history and with dark stories, like the Gothic stuff definitely comes pretty naturally. As a kid, after all the children's classics, the next thing I went for was the Brontes. So like Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre were my next obsessions. So it might eventually wind its way into some YA fiction. I have never done any historical fiction. And of course you can do modern Gothic and that's lots of fun. Actually, my next YA is kind of a creepy Midwestern Gothic in a way. It's like the more YA version of some of the themes in Long Lost, actually. I think I had more I wanted to play with. But it's a very different plot, very different kind of story, but some of the same little chess pieces are there. So maybe eventually even more Gothic story. We'll see.
It is interesting. As we were listening to the audiobook, at one point my daughter turned to me and she said that she would listen to or read a whole story just about the Hazel and Pearl characters. And I thought and I totally agreed with that sentiment. It just felt like those two stories, there are a lot of times when you're reading these stories that are cutting back and forth, you're kind of, you get to the end of a section and you're like, oh man, now I got to go to this other one and I was just getting into this. But these stories, they felt so intertwined, but also I think just so engaging. The stuff from 100 years ago felt just as present and relevant and interesting. In some ways, even more interesting because it has that sort of element of spookiness and time before electricity, sort of, or right on the cusp kind of thing. Yeah. So we are sort of, I think, approaching the end of the Q&A book club element, but I did want to talk about the cover to this book, because this is, I think, maybe the most beautiful middle grade book cover I've ever seen. And I vaguely recall that there is a story behind the artist for this cover.
Yes. So the artists are Anna and Elena Balbuso. They are twin sisters. How perfect is this? They are Italian, and they are brilliant graphic designers who work together and have done everything from like opera posters to magazine illustrations, and now they do lots of gorgeous cover art, like Stefan Bachmann's latest Cinders and Sparrows is theirs, The Wolf's Curse, Jessica Vitalis is theirs. And yeah, I got so just beyond lucky with what they did. And I felt like the universe was just giving me this present. Like, not only is this art just so gorgeous, so much better than anything I could have imagined, but yeah, that it's created by a pair of sisters in a story that's about layers of pairs of sisters just felt like, mwah! Yeah.
Yeah. It's the whole package. It's great. All right. So I think that about wraps us up. I did want to once again remind everyone that next month we'll be discussing Hide and Seeker by Dr. Herman. So please, check out Spooky Middle Grade on YouTube for that, and visit us at spookymiddlegrade.com. And our
me is popping on.
Is here. Kim?
Yes, well, because I know that before we go, we always have a final question from our favorite viewer. Now that we picked favorites, Miss Nikki. And so, yeah, she was just texting me that she has a question. So I wanted to not miss out on this one before we go. And I'm guessing it's going to be pretty epic. So we definitely don't want to miss this one. All right. So here we go. And you might need a minute to consider this. So if you were on a cooking reality TV show, what foods would you cook that best connect with your bugs? Interesting. Well, of course, I feel like everybody has to answer this, but we should probably go to Jacqueline first, since you're in the hot seat tonight.
Wow. I love food and I love to bake, and yet my books are not very foodie. And in Long Lost, I think the only food references are like there are biscuits with blueberry jam that are in Hazel and Pearl's story. So there's a little something that I might, concoct. I am an obsessive cookie baker and froster. So I think that what I might actually have to do is create, maybe I'd even be inspired by some of the gorgeous stuff on the cover and have like little blackbirds and leaves and creepy Victorian paper cut silhouettes, and I those elaborately. Yeah, that's what I would do. That would be fun. All right, there's my answer.
That's a great answer. Let's see. Ash, what about you? That's a tough one.
Well, I actually have an answer to this one already. So my books are set in Appalachia, both of them. And so one of my favorite things to eat besides like shrimp and grits is this cake called an apple stack cake. And it's basically like pancakes, chopped apples, just all the way to the top. And then you cover the whole thing with like powdered sugar. And then you put it in the refrigerator and it ends up being like an apple crepe kind of. So I think that would have to be it if I had like 3 days.
Delicious. I love it. Lorian, what would you cook?
Oh gosh, I would like be crying in a corner. Anytime I watch reality cooking shows, I get so nervous. Like, why do they do this? But I guess I would make a chocolate cake and some herbal tea a la Grandma Jane from the Stitchers. She's always cooking delicious things that would taste way better than mine, but I'm not the best baker.
Ooh, yummy. Josh, do you have cooking in the Witches of Willow Cove?
Yes, and thank you for coming to me last, because I actually had a chance to think about this. So The Witches of Willow Cove and its sequel, they're all kind of set in the fall in New England, and which is my favorite place and my favorite time. And it feels so closely tied to sort of Thanksgiving foods and pumpkin pies and outdoor fire pits and s'mores and that sort of thing. So I think maybe I would do some really elaborate s'mores or some Thanksgiving desserts to tie in.
Ooh, that sounds delicious. Yeah, I think I'm always just aspirational. Like, what do I want to eat? What am I hungry for? In my stories, like they're constantly eating, and I just want to provide some coziness, I think. So I cannot tell you how many chocolate chip cookies and like hot chocolate they eat in Skeleton Tree, and it has to be the chocolate chip cookies from the tube, which is really the only kind I would make. So there's also like a lot of borscht and borzuk, like this little fried dough from Kyrgyzstan, because Miss Francine, my favorite character, is always making that stuff. I have lots of food in my, like there's a really cool coffee shop with fabulous like Bigfoot themed desserts and drinks, and Hello Future Me. Food plays an important role in Bone Hollow. There's these sweet and salty biscuits that are really good, and like this, they're always serving tea and like this really cool teapot, but it's also kind of mysterious, this food, because there's some food that's like only for dead people. So probably that would get in there too. But that was a great question. So thanks to Miss Nikki, and just fun to pop in here at the end and thank everyone for joining us. And thanks to Josh for hosting. And like you mentioned, we have a great book next week. So as we head out, I will leave you with the info, or next month, for our July book club live. So definitely check out that book. And actually, if you head over to our channel and subscribe, you'll get reminders for our videos, and you can actually set a reminder right now for next month's book club. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us this week. Bye.
Bye.